Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Next 2020. My name's Gabriella Heiser, and I'm your host for this show on the Boca Raton Tribune TV. So welcome to the Boca Raton Tribune TV. If you like the show, if you like the channel, make sure to like us on Facebook, like us on YouTube, so you can be kept up to date on what's happening, on what we're posting. Also, feel free to like this video so that it can pop up more and you can see different shows that we have. Also, if you have any questions throughout the show for our guests, you can post them in the chat feature, in the comment section, whatever you want to call it, and we'll answer your questions on the show live. So today we'll be talking to first-generation students who are in their postgraduate careers. We're going to be talking about their journey and how they paved the way. So without further ado, let's welcome our guests, Alex and Casey. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you both here. So I know you both very well, but our audience don't. So let's start off with you guys introducing yourself. Tell us what undergrad you went to, what school you currently go to, and what your area of interest is. Alex, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I went to Lewis University, which is Chicagoland area university out in Romeoville. I double majored in philosophy of law and psychology, and I minored in political science. And right now, I go to UIC John Marshall with Casey and Gabby, entering my second year. Area of interest is immigration for the most part, but public interest generally.
That's awesome. What about you, Casey?
I went to Hood College. I was a double major in sociology and criminal justice. I currently go to UIC John Marshall, and I want to go into civil rights law and personal injury.
That's awesome. So you guys are both doing big things. And as the audience can now know, we all go to the same school and are all classmates. So kind of cool. So today's show, we're talking about being a first-generation student. So to get started on that, can you guys tell us a little bit about your background, about your family, where you came from, what your family story is, and why you're a first-generation student? So Casey, let's start with you this time.
My mom grew up in the Philippines and my dad grew up in Korea. So they immigrated here and they started life and had me. But I have a strong immigration background with my family and they mean the world to me. So yeah.
That's awesome. What about you, Alex?
So both my parents were born and raised in Mexico. They migrated here together in '89. My dad, though, bounced back between the States and Mexico for quite a bit, just working in the U.S. for a couple years, bringing that money back home to Mexico. But met my mom and then settled here in Chicago.
So cute. That's awesome. And how do you guys think that has influenced you and fueled your drive to do more? You both double majored. You both want to do a lot of things. How do you think that has fueled you? Alex, how did you start?
Well, I mean, being specifically Mexican American and growing up in an underprivileged community, I definitely got to see a lot of the injustices that come with a lack of resources, from not knowing how to file your taxes to how to register to vote, which seem kind of unconventional things, but when you come into a country not knowing really anything. So my drive is really just being that resource for my family and opening these doors just so I'm the youngest of three, but my little cousins and stuff like that, or my elder family members, don't have these confusions anymore, just to be able to answer these questions and be there for them.
Awesome.
I agree with Alex. I feel coming from parents that immigrated, the drive to be successful is a lot stronger compared to others, because not only that you want to pave the way for other generations to come, but you also want to make your parents proud because they gave up everything for you. And not only that, I grew up with my father always telling me that I needed to give back to the community, especially since he always said your rights were never given to you. They're not something simply handed over, that people fought for it. So, that's really the main drive to become a lawyer and mostly be where I am.
For sure. That's amazing. To do better and give back to people and our families and next generations. That's really important. I think that's a huge, not burden we carry, but a huge blessing, honestly. It's like, wow, I can do this to help our family and to help the next generations to come. That's awesome. So I know everyone has started their career, their educational career, wanting to do something else. Sometimes, not everyone, but because I always wanted to be a lawyer, but that's just me. So what is a profession you had in mind when you first started? I guess, what's the first profession you ever wanted to do? And how did you decide what path was best for you from that point?
Oh, well, I personally was going to go into the military in the beginning. I was going to go to OTS. You know, my dad, like I said, he really taught me to give back to my community. I didn't know what that meant. I thought that meant go in the military and serve your time. But I met a really good professor in undergrad who pushed me to try to be a lawyer, at least go to law school. And I eventually ended up in law school and doing well, and I love it.
You're muted. Okay.
Okay. Not necessarily a similar story. I was so indecisive with what I wanted to do. I didn't really take college seriously until maybe my last year of high school. And with that in mind, I chose like political science, psych, and philosophy because I was like, I don't know if I want to be a lawyer because doing higher education is already such a stretch for first generation students that like getting a bachelor's, you're exceeding expectations like crazy from just that. And then to do law school, it just seemed too much of a stretch, too much like work, and it was too many obstacles. But I decided that, I mean, like if I had a younger sibling that was saying these things, I pushed them to do it. And, you know, someone has to be the first, someone has to open these doors. So I just decided to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And going off of that, what do you think inspired you to continue your academic career, even though when it seemed so hard, so complicated to get to? What inspired you to continue doing that and ultimately become a lawyer, soon to be a lawyer?
I think it's like the biggest thing is knowing that if you're the first one, that means it won't be harder for the other people behind you. Like it's really about getting through those hardships so it's easier for the next generation to come.
Yeah.
And continuing on was probably the biggest battle right now. Like you could tell within our group chat, like how many times do each of us threaten to drop out after like every exam. It's so hard. Like if you think like the hardest part is getting into law school, like that was really just the easy part. The LSAT was nothing compared to like the finals we're taking now. But honestly, the inspiration that comes from like staying in school really comes from like our study group. We're like a group of 9, I think, right? Yeah. We're all in the same study group for people that are watching. But because what I really like our group dynamic, we all are very different people with like very different backgrounds, and we all bring such different stuff to the table, which means like we have different perspectives. So usually that will be like us spending an hour on one hypothetical. But that's really inspiration where I'm like, you know, you feel like you're an imposter in this area, and I'm like, I don't belong. Like it's already so hard to kind of get through the door, but then seeing that like there's so many different types of people, and that like that's kind of what lawyers want is a different mind and approaching situations differently. So I'm like, you know what, like yeah, we're supposed to be different. So that's like, all right, we'll stay.
Yeah, it's taking those differences and not thinking of it as a disadvantage, but really seeing how you can benefit from it, how you can benefit to others as well from it. That's awesome. Yeah, I love our group chat. I moved from Florida to Chicago, and it was very scary going all alone. And then I found a nice, good group of friends, and that definitely changed a lot. Definitely helped the process. And law school's already hard, so it was like everything all at once. So talking about our study group and our group of friends, I consider you guys mentors, but I guess professionally speaking, do you guys have any mentors that helped you along the way, and how has that relationship helped you? Alex, let's start with you.
I didn't have an explicit mentor besides family, I guess. What helped me persevere through like undergrad was only until I joined like a Latin student group at my school. And they weren't necessarily mentors, but it was like a space where I found people that were just like me. You know, usually Latin students are going to be first generation, and it was just a nice area to be able to relate to like the struggles, and you don't feel alone. So
Yeah.
like they figured out the ropes in this area, I figured it out in a different area, and we just kind of shared like these ins and outs between each other. So it wasn't necessarily a mentor, but it was like a support system.
Yeah. Still will help you push through. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I found my mentor as like a professor.
Oh, you muted yourself.
That was really weird. Okay. I found like a mentor through a professor, my CSO advisor, which is Career Service Office advisor. And then the Writing Center too, like has become my mentor as well, especially Shakira Pleasant. But I found them by just like taking the time after school and meeting with those professors and talking to them and slowly building that trust. So you can eventually come to them with like career problems and asking them for help. I think like the biggest thing is that they've really helped me grow as a professional person, like how to overcome hardships, especially in law school. Those finals will be hard and those papers are devastating. I mean, like, there's been times where I've gone to the writing center and I'm on the verge of crying because I think I wrote a terrible memo. And like Shakira Pleasant would be like, "You're fine, you're great, you're good." And it's just that emotional support, but also them also knowing who you are and having your name in their back of their mind so they can refer you later on to a different career.
Yeah, that's huge. And I know, Casey, you just said that you went to your career service office and like I guess you were intentional on how to get on getting these mentors. Do you guys have any other advice for someone who's looking for a mentor and just doesn't know how to?
I think the biggest thing is like I think it's going to clubs for sure. Like if you were a lawyer or a law student, like going to the bar associations and just sitting and like listening a couple of times and then approaching someone. Another one is just like seeing somebody you can relate to. Like professors will actually make personal jokes every once in a while. And that's just like an insight to just go after class and talk to them. It's just like the initiative to make it, but that doesn't mean like you right off the bat say everything about your personal life. It's just like building a relationship with random people at that point.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that student organizations are a resource, especially for first generation students. Like my school was really a commuter school. And I mean, I was that student for like the first 2 years where I would just go to class and go home. And it wasn't until my last year where I started being active, in my last 2 years where I started to be active. And I'm like, wow, like I definitely missed out on a lot. I definitely could have done better the first 2 years if I had this space. And I know universities should have mentorship programs. I know my undergrad did. I didn't necessarily do it. But they usually match you up with like another student or sometimes a professor. But if you can't like actively find like in Casey's case, where like a professor that you've already related to and you can seek help from, sometimes you do need like that organizational system that this university should have with mentorship programs.
Right. Good. That's awesome. And now that we were talking about mentors, what is one piece of valuable advice you received throughout your career, either through your mentor or a group of friends or whatever? Alex, you can start us off since your mic is unmuted.
One piece of advice, man, I think I'd have to quote my dad on this one. It's such a simple statement, but this is something that he's told my siblings and I since we were kids, since like I began my educational career in high school. And it's in Spanish, so I'll obviously translate it. But he'd always say like, todo es difícil cuando uno no sabe, which means everything is difficult when you don't know. And this relates a lot to like first gen because you do feel that struggle. You do have to work twice as hard because you're not only learning all the curriculum that the generational students are learning, but you're learning the ropes, which sometimes feels more difficult because it really affects your mental health. And it's like it's a dual hybrid learning, and you're missing out on some of these opportunities that you could have had should you have known that this was here. You're missing out on excelling more because you don't have this like general information that like college students usually have. So with that in mind, it's just you have to work hard. You have to like miss out on parties, family events, and stuff like that, and that's just ultimately what it takes. But the give and take from that is that you're opening these doors, and I think that's like one of the most rewarding things possible is to be able to do that as a first generation student.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think like the best advice I've ever received, and I'm probably didn't understand it at the time, but it's invest in yourself, invest in your mental health and your physical health and your future and career. But most importantly, to not compare yourself to other people, especially the academic achievements. And I think like once I entered law school, I really finally understood what that meant. And it's really just like about taking step by step and making sure that you're achieving the dreams that you want, but you're not falling backwards. And like, I mean, I'm a victim of it, and I'm sure a lot of people do, but I always compare my achievements with someone else's. I'm always like, why are they getting better grades? Why are they getting these? And I think at the end of the day, like that's not helpful at all. Like it's not a competition, especially it's not a competition with minority women because we're both in the same boat. And I think at the end of the day, it's just like constantly investing in yourself to make sure that you're okay, but you're also on the right path that you want to be on.
Yeah. I also think it's important, like tying back and not, I mean, mentorship, but like really a support group. Like if you're surrounded by people like us personally, we have our little study group that we always work with, and we're all different, but I think we all kind of face similar like challenges. You know what I mean? Like us three, we're all three of us are minority women. So like we bond over that. And that's something that helps us get through not just like the mental challenges of high school, but the physical challenges, the emotional challenges, all of it. I think that's super important. And I would say that even like having that one connection with someone is also a great way of finding mentors or finding someone that you can look up to, like the bar associations and things like that you were talking about. I'm sure other postgraduate careers have like associations like this. So if anyone's watching is not in law school, I'm sure there's different associations. But if you go to an event, any networking event, you see someone who's like, oh, wow, they're Brazilian too. Oh, wow, they have do this. And I love that. Like connect with someone over that. I think that can definitely set you apart. Like, oh, the person researched me, knows about me, cares about my likes, you know, things like that. It's just a little plug.
Yeah, support groups are everything.
Yeah.
You can't go through college. I would even say high school, high school, especially postgraduate programs without a support group. They are your everything. You really can't go through schooling alone. You need a support group.
A good support group.
So, yeah, especially.
Like Casey was saying, like looking at each other and competing. If you're in a support group that constantly is just like pitting you against other people, that I don't think it's a good support group. Like they're not really supporting you. They're just, you know, scaring you more.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. That was my little spiel of support. So being a first generation student, there's a lot of unknown barriers, as we know. But let's tell the audience, like, what are some of the barriers we face?
Pretending like you know stuff. Literally, it's acting the part, man. Like, I have such the bad habit of walking in the room and like, I'm like, all right, where are the Latino students? And it's just going to be a letdown every time because, I mean, that's just the reality right now is that majority or, you know, small percentage is always going to be the minority groups in like postgraduate programs and stuff like that. But yeah, acting the part, knowing that there's very few, but it's kind of like fake it till you make it and Google everything.
I think the biggest barrier is the last name, like somebody's last name because they're associated with someone else. It kills every time. Like you're up for a job and then you find out the person that got it is because, oh, it's the prosecution's daughter or it's the prosecution's son. And it's like you're a first generation, you're making a name for yourself. Like you're networking on that name. Nobody else has done it before. And I think that is the biggest struggle. Your grades can mean so much to you and it can show that you're good academically. But in the end, there are times where that last name will just come in and swoop in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another barrier that first generation students face is just not knowing things like Alex was talking about, but like in the sense of not knowing what you have to apply for, not knowing like, hey, you need to do this application because this is due tomorrow. And it's like knowing all these little tiny things that most people are just know it. Like, oh, my brother told me to do that. My dad did it and he told me to do it. It's like, oh, I didn't know. Where did you find that? How do I do it? I mean, that's challenging too.
The worst is like somebody was like, you should get your 7-Eleven. Like 7-Eleven's great. And I was like, yeah, I'll get my 7-Eleven. And then I was like, so I searched up, I was like, what is a 7-Eleven? And it's just the gas station pulling up. And I'm like, oh God, I should have asked what it was.
That's the worst. You like hold things in and you're like, oh, I'll research it later. And you're like, oh, wait, this isn't time for research.
I remember orientation. They're like, everyone's kind of, or they were asking questions like, what type of law you want to work into? And they're like, all right, who wants to do big law? It's a bunch of people raising their hands. And I'm like, big law as opposed to small law. Like, you don't know these things. And you have to, like, you're too afraid to ask because it's just kind of a given. And I think we really need to have these cultural changes. We need to stop assuming that everyone comes from or has the ability to have exposure to these kinds of normal things, or just like learning the ropes and things like that sometimes. And it's not dumbing it down too, it's really just a cultural change at this point. But
Right. And I think that's also another barrier first generation students face is that like we don't have I think it all boils down to confidence. Like we don't have the confidence to ask. I think it's important to know like, hey, we don't know, we don't have all the answers, but that's okay. And it's okay to ask. Whereas other people are just like, oh, I know it. And like, they have that confidence that they know it, but we have to have that confidence that like, hey, I don't know it. Can you help me? Like, I want to build this relationship. I want to know just like you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that goes like also with class, like having that confidence, especially in law school, to be wrong. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like I was taught you don't like say things to your elders, and sometimes like they're asking for a debate, especially with the professor, and you're afraid to debate them or like say things like, oh no, you're wrong because this. And it's just like that cultural barrier, but it's also being confident to be wrong and be corrected at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good one. So we talked about a few different barriers, and how have you personally overcome these barriers? If like which ones you face and how you overcame it, I guess.
We're still getting through them. I think a big part is working up to that confidence, right? Like this is actually a great example of how doing it, creating space to feel comfortable about not knowing. It's like creating representation, because first generation students feel incredibly isolated, and there are hundreds and thousands of us, and there's going to be hundreds and thousands more, because we're going to keep motivating these students to be the first in their families to break down these walls and open these doors. So representation has to be a big one. But me personally, I rely on my support group a lot, and just talking to you guys, right, where we just vent. But it's also just creating the mindset of knowing that, or just accepting the fact that you are going to have to work harder. And yes, it is unfair, but the end goal, should we reach it, it's going to be worth it in the end. It has to be, just because it means so much more knowing that you had to work harder for it. And that's just the light at the end of my tunnel. And I'm just focused on that. And it's just resilience, persevering, and venting with you guys.
Yeah, I think it's just always reflecting on who you are personally. Like I've overcame a lot of stuff personally in my past, but also knowing like you can always turn to a family member, you can always turn to your support system, and you'll get through it. Because I mean, there are days where you're just like, I can't do this anymore, and you just feel like it's the end, like you want to drop out everything. I mean, if you've taken a Bernabe class, you're gonna feel that one day or somehow, especially during his final, you'll probably feel it. But I mean, it's definitely like reflecting, like I'm strong, like I've gotten here already, like I'm a strong person. I have these amazing friends. Why else would they be my friends? Because I'm a good person. But it's just, it's reflecting and then knowing like you're getting these grades because you are meant to be there.
Right.
And it's just like a build up. Like I didn't talk at all my first semester, and my second semester I was a lot more vocal. So I couldn't imagine what 2L is going to be like. I'm sure I'm probably going to get in a lot of debates for sure. But it's building up and knowing that you're meant to be there for sure.
That's awesome. Very true information. Real quick, let me just plug, if anyone watching has any questions that they want answered, any comments you want to make, definitely just put them in the comments and we will answer them, talk about it. Also, feel free to like and share the video so more people can see it and all of that jazz. So we talked about barriers. We talked about how you overcame it, or how we're overcoming it presently. But what is one advice you would give to someone who is going to go through or is going through what we're going through right now? Casey, let's start with you.
My professor, my undergraduate law professor, she told me a really good advice, and I hope other people hear it, which I'm going to say it. Always be careful who you associate yourself with. I think that's the biggest thing. Like you start your professional career as a lawyer, law student, whatever, the day you walk in orientation. So the person you associate yourself with and become friends with is probably what people are going to think about you in 4 to 5 years. I think that's the biggest thing. Like I've heard people say, oh, I'm never going to refer this student to a job because I've seen how she conducts herself. I've seen how she studies, and she doesn't care. She's only here for one thing. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's not saying don't make friends, but know that you're who you are, especially as a first generation. You still have to put this persona that you are meant to be here, and you shouldn't let anything else undercut it. And that's not saying like, oh, one friend parties all the time, you can't be friends with them. It's saying don't be the friend. Don't have a friend that quin beats every single thing and cheats during exam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would definitely say remember where you come from and where you're going. Because sometimes, like, well, you kind of do have to fake it till you make it. Always embrace the fact that you're a diverse student and you're a first generation student. Like, those two in and of themselves are accomplishments. And flaunt it. Like, yes, I am first gen. Yes, my parents just came here. Yes, I don't know what I'm doing, but I had to work a lot harder. And I deserve to be in this space. I deserve to be heard in this space. And yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. And then, Gabby, you love this quote, ponte las pilas.
I do.
Which means put on your batteries, which doesn't make too much sense in English. But that just means like work your butt off, because that's what it takes. And again, like I've said before, it's unfair, but you know what? You're starting it, and that's just what it takes.
Yeah. It's funny, Casey was talking about orientation, starting your professional career on day one. And this goes for any postgraduate career, honestly. And I would even stretch it as far as say it's undergrad. But undergrad might be a push depending on where you're going. But anyways, like we've gone through a whole rough year of our first year of law school. We've gone through a pandemic. We've gone through all this stuff. But I still remember things that happened during orientation. I'm like, oh, I remember that kid. He said this and this and that. And I didn't know what that meant. And it is true. You have to be ready to network every day in class. Like when I go into class personally, like I go in knowing like these are my future colleagues. I'm going to be working with them. So personally, like I don't just pull up to class just, oh, let's dilly dally. Let's just talk during class. I'm like, okay, let's network. Like it's a form of networking, really. So yeah, I think that's great advice too. I think one advice I'd give for someone who's starting their postgraduate career, because there's few like first generation and minorities in general in post grad, and I think the advice I would give is to ask for help. Find that mentor, find that person. Like I remember I was in a business fraternity in undergrad, and I remember like one girl went to law school, and I was like, okay, I'm going to talk to her. We don't really talk all that much, but I'm going to reach out to her because I want to do what she's doing. So I think it's important to like make those connections early on, and then just keep them. Like, obviously, don't just use them. Like, build a relationship with these people, but be willing to ask for help, ask for advice for things, because it's confusing, and we all know it's confusing. Like, if you ask any of us, we'll be like, yeah, LSAT was difficult to understand, but you know, we all got through it. So it's being willing to make like establish these relationships and ask these questions. That would be my advice in case everyone was wondering.
Yeah, if you're milky with the word network, because it always sounds so like fake, I guess.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, in law school it's a different term, I guess, but like
Right.
in undergrad or other post-degree or postgraduate programs, it's just building relationships.
Yeah.
And this is something I always have to tell myself. So I know when I give advice, I definitely have to hear it myself. But your questions are not stupid. Ask them. Ask them. Because there's probably someone else questioning it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know I personally have to get better at that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, usually
in
that's
class,
what it is.
in one of our classes, Alex sat next to me, and I remember one time she like passed me a Post-it note. She's like, "Can you ask him this?" I'm like, "Alex, can you ask him?"
Because too much time had passed, and I'm too afraid to ask.
Don't be afraid to ask questions. Always just do it.
What? Leave me alone. I'm shy.
No, I wasn't attacking you. I'm just saying in general. Like, that's my.
Well, we always like in our group chat, like we always elect Haley to ask the question.
We do.
So all the professors always like her.
They do. That's true. All right, guys. So looking at first the struggle of first generation students in the postgraduate world, what is one way that you think that they can be assisted to succeed? You know, we talked about the different struggles. We talked about how we personally overcame it. How do you think like the system can better assist them, I guess? I know that's a big question, but I'm not going to call on anyone to answer that one because I feel like that's a big one. So you have.
I could start this if you like.
Okay, go for it.
There definitely has to be some kind of program that has to even the playing field. Like, not necessarily an additional orientation or something like that, but these resources that universities have to provide for their students that literally tell you step by step or like kind of uncover these norms or these things that generational students already know. Like we definitely need to help them. And it's not necessarily giving them a leg up because generational students already have a leg up. So it's providing just points of contact or, you know, by this time you should have already done this. Like I think about for applying for law school, you have to provide some letters of recommendation. Some schools provide or require 2, some 3, some 1. And I know my university was small, so it's pretty easy to establish like good relationships with the professors. But let's say you went to like U of I or a bigger school where it's a little bit more harder to establish good relationship with your professors. Like freshman year, generational students already know that they need these letter of recommendations, so they could start to build up to get to that point. And first gen, they'll figure that out once they apply. They're like, oh, I need letters of rec. How many? And then it's sometimes they require like a letter of rec from an employer or a certain professor and things like that. Like these are just things that are already known. And we really need, like, by freshman year, there needs to be a plan of action for these students just to even the playing field for sure.
I agree with Alex. Like, I hate it when somebody's like, oh, I'm a first gen too, and they're really successful in their career already, and they do nothing. Like, that's it. Like, nothing. They don't give back. They don't help you. They don't refer you. It's like we should all be working together because we are all making a name for ourselves. And you got to that point where you're successful, but we're working against a system now where you should be helping me and I should be helping you. It's just one of those things. And I think another thing is I hate it, and I think you guys all know, I hate scholarships that ask for perfection or 4.0 with like I don't know, four jobs, working a full-time school, like that drives me crazy. Like, it's like, why are you asking first generation minorities to be perfect? Like, we come from all different backgrounds, and it's already a representation that we're here, we're persevering, we're resilient, but it drives me crazy. So like, together we should work against this system that is making us be perfect and trying to like go against us. Like, I mean, there's so many fees that you don't even realize going into law school. And I think we need to tell at least first generations, like, you have to pay for a bar, you have to pay for your MPRE, like all these classes. And it's like, here's law school, let me give you $100,000 and you have to be perfect to get these scholarships. Oh, by the way, you have all these other fees.
Yeah.
Like, it's just crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say, like, usually first-gen minority students know the scams of college. Like, there are so many. You have to pay to send your transcripts to a school. You have to pay for every step. Like, yes, these are 100% scams. But we, in this economy, in this reality of the United States, we have to, in order to get a seat at the table, we have to get these degrees. We have to go to these elite schools and meet these requirements and things like that. And again, it's really just this cultural change. Like, we need to start recognizing where our first gen students are coming from, because I mean, we're first generation, so that means our parents came here usually with nothing. My parents got here with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and they established a life for us. Like, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. So it's a lot of work that has to be done, and we need to stop with everything's Casey saying, like, these perfect students. I mean, I remember our contract professor, which is like one of the greatest professors in our entire lives.
Shout out to Professor Robinson.
I was gonna call him Vice President. Dr. Robinson or Professor Robinson is such an amazing professor. He was really one of the only professors that kept vouching for first gen. Because I remember in one of his office hours, he was explaining that first generation students usually have this GPA, so don't feel let down if you don't have like a 3.8 or something like that, because I was feeling insecure about my GPA, because it was like one of the lowest I'd ever had before. Like, undergrad, I had a lot better. So I started to get worried, and he was just kind of verifying with me that, like, no, like, what you're doing is like how first gen students usually start, and that's just a given because of like the fact that you're on this by yourself. You know, you don't have like an uncle that's a judge or a father that has its own firm, stuff like that. So how do we expect like us to be at the same level when we're starting back here?
Right. And it's even like simple things. Like, it's not like we can go home and be like, hey, Dad, did you see this law that was just passed? Or like this law that exists? It's like, well, in Brazil, we have a different law. You know what I mean? And it's not that like our parents aren't smart. Like, our parents are really well educated and amazing people. But it's like, there is that cultural difference that it's just different. And like Casey was talking about the fees, I think the fees are insane. There's a fees for the system to send the transcripts, and then there's a fee to actually send the transcripts. Like, what am I paying anyways? But these fees shouldn't be a discouragement. It should really, you be looking at yourself that you're investing in something big. You know what I mean? I think one of the things that I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but once I actually started getting closer and like looking at what it entailed, I got intimidated. I was very scared. I almost didn't go to law school last year because I was like, this is just a huge investment. I don't know if I'm ready. But it's like, you need to be willing to push yourself and go that extra mile, because if you work hard, you will, like, it will pay off, you know? And I think that's important to remember. Like, don't be discouraged by the barriers we're talking about, the fees we're talking about, all of this. Just be an encouragement that, hey, these are issues, but look at us, we're doing it. You know what I mean? Look at all the other first gens who are doing it and are killing it, you know?
There's going to be a lot of barriers in your way. I mean, I know Gabby and I attended this dinner in the beginning of our first year that the Latin org at John Marshall had for its Latin students, specifically for their parents to come to meet the other Latin. There's 2 other Latin professors and I think some 2Ls, 3Ls, and an alumni. And the purpose of this dinner was for these parents to hear from the professors saying, yes, she is going to be in the library for like 10 hours straight. Yes, she can't come to this like quinceañera. She can't come to this family gathering. Like, you're not going to see her for 3 years. And this dinner was so beneficial for my mom because she understood it. Like, sometimes you just need to hear it from a professor.
Yeah.
And that's, again, another barrier. Like, generational students, like, the parents already get it. They understood, like, what it was like to go through college and all the sleepless nights and, like, studying for finals and stuff like that. Like, my parents didn't know what finals were, right? And now they had to hear, like, how law school goes. Like, these are a bunch of barriers, but just know that, like, I think about, like, if I ever had kids, like, the fact that I could be their college advisor, the fact that I could help them out with their FAFSA, or, you know, relate to, like, them going through their finals week, like, that's going to be such a rewarding process.
I think a big thing too, and I'm so lucky that our professor told me this, is that don't let people talk over you when you're talking. Like, demand respect. And I think, like, there's been times where someone mansplains when I'm saying the exact same thing. And I remember a professor pulling me aside and he's like, do not allow that. Do not allow anyone to talk over you. Like, you know what you're saying. And I think that's a big thing. It's like we have such a good support system. Like, I have you, Gabby, I have Alex, and like we work together and we're like, no, we're not taking this. But I can't imagine not having a person that doesn't relate to me culturally and generationally, and like being like, oh, okay, like I'll take this right now. If I didn't have you guys, like, I don't think I would be where I am at career wise, especially.
Love you too.
Same. I love our group.
I'm telling you, it's like that support system. We need it. It's what helps us get through it.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Much love, much love. So I know we're like kind of running out of time. So like I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the pandemic because you know that's a thing that we're currently in. So I wanted to ask how the pandemic has affected your educational career and how might it be different being a first gen studying at home, and how is that different from like anyone else who might just not a first gen, I guess, in the pandemic? Does my question make sense? I'm sorry, it like started fading out.
I
Okay.
think there's like a duality of issues that come with first gen. First, it's the parents not necessarily understanding how college works, and then understanding how virtual college works. So from that, I mean, like, I had to message my parents, like, please be quiet. Like, I'm going to an interview and things like that, because usually, like, I don't know how your parents are, mine will blast music, and then they'll start cooking, and they'd be like, Alejandra, like, come for whatever, like, take the meat out the fridge, or, like, start yelling about cleaning or something like that, and they don't care. They don't know necessarily, like, how virtual class works, right? And, I mean, these are, what is the term? Unprecedented times.
Yeah.
But I feel like a generational student won't necessarily have that struggle too much because the parent will understand, like, how you should be presented in class and things like that. It's not necessarily that, like, our parents are ignorant of that. It's just they didn't have the opportunity to have the exposure to how this stuff works. Right. So they'll, you know, barge in and be like, what's going on in class? And they'll probably come up on the street and like, what are you doing? It's like, that's the professor. It's like, oh, wait, he's seeing you right now? That's definitely going to be a barrier. And then also trying to study at home. Man, that I know it was super hard to transition to, because usually, like, ethnic houses are going to be loud houses, and you need a quiet space, and it's just, you got a million things running around. But yeah, maybe it's more of like a diversity thing. But yeah, I mean, unprecedented times, but it's difficult to transition for sure. Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest problem, and I think you guys know, I tend to overwork 8 a.m. till like 11 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the biggest thing is knowing when you need to step away. Like, I think I was the worst at stepping away, and you guys know that. I would be studying all the time. And it really affected me mentally. Like, I really felt isolated because I wasn't really talking to my fiance, who actually lives with me. Like, I don't think I spoke a word to him one day. And he's like, hi, are you, like, do you see me? But it's really like stepping away and giving yourself time But also like the family barrier too. Like I remember hearing things like, "Oh, you're now doing virtual school. That means you can come home, right?" Meanwhile, I have a 150-page brief to read and write a memo in 2 weeks that I've never written before. It's really that barrier, but it's like at the end of the day, like the only way you can help yourself and do well is to give yourself barriers. Give yourself time for your own mental health, and like also communicating with someone like, hey, I have more work than usual because I'm online. Like, hey, like I need time for myself to relax. Like I can't come and visit you, which you shouldn't be visiting anyone because pandemic, you know. But yeah, it's like it's a lot different, especially with family. Like my family is so big and I love them all to death. And I wish I could be with them all the time, but it's just like putting that barrier, which my mom is so understanding about, even though she's my best friend and I want to talk to her every day. But it's just those barriers and your own barriers, like giving yourself limits.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest thing is like awkwardly, in the most respectful way, trying to communicate to your family that like, I'm sorry, I cannot be with you. And you always try to put yourself in the perspective of like the receiving end. Like that just sounds like almost like a slap in the face. Like you don't want to be with us, you don't want to hang out with us, you always want to be alone. You always want to be with your friends or something like that. And it's like, no, there's nothing more in the world that I would want to do than to like sit and watch TV with you. But I can't. And I have to be alone, I have to study, and I have to do these things. And it's just unfortunately it's that disconnect that first generation students will always experience. And you know, it's unfortunate because your family is supposed to be your biggest support system. And I mean, once you kind of get to communicate and get them to really understand, like that dinner that I spoke about was really helpful, then it's just going to be a little bit easier from then on.
I really like that, Casey, you talked about mental health and being able to step away, because I think that's a part of the pandemic that people don't really talk about. You know, like everyone's talking about how hard it is just being stuck at home. Like, yeah, but that's not the rough part. The rough part is like always having your computer and your work right there and like always being able to work. So it's like, oh, I why not just work right now? And it's tough. I think that's really important that you touch on it. I think another like difference of being a first gen student, not necessarily us, but I'm saying just general like first generation students, is they might not have the resources that they need at home. Like, do they have good Wi-Fi? Do they have a good computer, a good solid computer that they can work on all hours of the day? You know what I mean? I think that's another huge issue that first gen students could face, like working at home and studying at home through the pandemic.
Right, you could even think about how, let's say you had your resources and your tutors at the school.
Yeah.
And now you're at home, and generational students can just ask like their, you know, parents or something like that. And now you're here by yourself, and like the only resource is you. So that's definitely a difference.
Yeah. And how do you guys think that first gen students can be better assisted through this, specifically the pandemic? I know like the pandemic has been hard on everyone and it's something unprecedented that none of us have gone through. But how do you think specifically the first generation students can be assisted to continue their educational careers and not let the pandemic be something that deters them on top of every other barrier that deters them?
I feel like the biggest thing is compassion, kind of like what the case is saying, like the mental health aspect of it. And then just being compassionate and understanding that first gen students might have different family obligations or might not have like the resources you're talking about, like good Wi-Fi and things like that. So you have to let a lot of things slide, like as a professor, just knowing that all of these students don't come from the same household. And so that usually means that like they can't access class at this hour, they only have, maybe they share a computer or something like that. But yeah, I think professors really have to be empathetic. Universities all should be incredibly empathetic. Lower your tuition.
Say a little louder. I didn't hear that.
We just really need to be incredibly empathetic during these times, for sure.
I think reaching out to like, I think the isolation is a lot worse for sure for first generation. I mean, like you're studying for hours and you're not speaking to anyone, like it's gonna like weigh on you some way somehow. And I couldn't imagine have kids during finals or like your husband loses his job and he's financially supporting you. It's just like constantly reaching out. Like I think the first 2 months of the pandemic, I was not okay. Like I really missed the social interaction that I had. And then, Professor Robinson coming in, like checking in on us, like always writing to us. And, when the whole Black Lives Matter happened, he reached out to us. It's like those professors and those mentors, but it's also those friends. And I think schools need to become more compassionate, but like also willing financially to support those students. Because like Alex and you guys said, like some people don't have Wi-Fi. Some people don't even have like a working computer. I know one requirement is like you need to have a computer with a microphone and camera. Like what if they don't have that? I know some people that just had an iPad and that wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
It's those requirements for sure need to be broken down.
Yeah, that's so important. Side note, like not really related to this, but thinking back to when Alex was saying like having a big family that's always loud and whatnot. I remember one of like our online classes last semester, this girl was being called on in the middle class. She's like, "Mom, turn off the vacuum." And that was great. I was like, I feel that. Like we're all just making it one day at a time. But yeah, go for it.
No, go finish your thought.
I was just going to say, like, yeah, I think it's really important that people are aware, like, these things are going to happen. Your mom will be turning on the vacuum. You know what I mean? It's fine. Your dog is going to bark. Dogs are going to bark. Birds are going to chirp, whatever happens. And it really is just being compassionate and being willing to work with everything that life's thrown at you.
I was going to say my biggest fear was, like, my mom being like, Alejandra, like, come clean your room. I'm like, oh, man. They hold 23 years of age and still.
I love that.
At least you weren't in an oral argument and your dogs start barking like crazy. And you're like sitting there like, should I keep going or should I mute myself? And he's like, keep going. And they're howling at the thunder and you're like, Jesus Christ, this is the worst timing in the entire world. But those times, man, it's good memories to say one day you went through a pandemic and that's what happened.
Yeah. That's awesome. Also, okay, so clearly you both are very hardworking women who are doing great things and hustling all the time. So I want to know, what are some of your 3-year goals and what you're doing currently to develop those goals? Why are you laughing?
I feel like my goals change all the time, but I really hope I'm in like a small to medium firm, not like have my bar by then, like or certified at least. And I really want to be a litigator. I love the courtroom. I love oral arguments. That's definitely where I want to be. I do not want to be sitting behind a desk and not having those clients, never being in the courtroom. I really hope I'm there and working my way to those big, hard litigations where I'm like developing civil rights and giving rights to others. Like, I really hope that eventually happens, but we shall see.
We're working on it every day. That's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just graduating, getting licensed in Illinois, and hopefully, 3 years would be 2023?
Yeah.
Right, okay, so hopefully I'd be employed, hopefully with an immigration firm, something like that, and then, yeah, just being able to establish myself.
That's awesome. You guys will. You guys are doing great things and working every day, so keep it going. Mm-hmm. All right, so as we're closing off, one thing that I aim to do with this show is just connect young professionals. I mean, yeah, you're all young adults in the profession, so yeah. Anyways, to connect young professionals with one another. So if someone's watching this show and they have questions for you, or they really like resonated with something you said, or even if they want to work together with you on some project or something. So if you guys are willing to, if you could give contact information or social media handles or whatever, just so the audience can have a way to contact you if they desire. Alex, you? Yeah.
I have a Twitter, I guess, if you would like to contact me there. It's Alex backwards, so XELAI Barrios, Barrios on Twitter, and then my LinkedIn is just Alejandro Barrios. There's very few Alejandro Barrios on LinkedIn, so I'm sure it won't be difficult to find me.
And I just gave my website because all my contact info is in there. So go ahead and check my website out, and you can always email and text me if you want.
Perfect. That's awesome, guys. Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope that if anyone needs help, if anyone needs encouragement or support or whatever the case is, that you reach out and get that support you need. Thank you guys for being on the show and having these difficult conversations that are needed to have. You guys are amazing. I love you guys. I'm sure the audience loves you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, my pleasure. And to the audience, thank you so much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed the show today. I hope you come back and watch more shows, like the channel, like the Boca Raton Tribune page on Facebook, just so you can be kept up to date on what we're doing. If you have any specific topics you want to talk about, if you ever want to be on the show, reach out. We're open. This is an open platform, as I like to call it. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.